Thanks for coming, guys. My name is Rich Christie. I'm the co-founder of Prescription Tillage Technology. My son Ryan and I started it. We also designed the blades. The blades were designed because of crop failure. Okay, I live in Clarinda, Iowa. I grew up in southwest Iowa. It rains when you don't want it to, and when you're begging for one, you're not going to get it. And so the blades were designed because of what we perceive to be crop failure. Typically, you'll get 10 bushels of corn for every inch of water. Otherwise, every inch of water in reserves. Some soils have a ½ inch of water in the top 6 inches, or 2 million pounds. Some will have 2 inches with good soil structure, biology. Cover crops is really improving that. Iowa has passed a Clean Groundwater Act, so I think cover crops are going to become more prevalent. Nebraska is getting, in Iowa, Nebraska is getting more aggressive on no-till. They have limited rainfall. All right, so the name of the company is Prescription Tillage. You can find us at prescriptiontillage.com. We have a lot of videos on there. We are updating the website. Our focus is agronomics. Agronomics are #1 because agronomics pays the bills. If you have farmers that don't have yield, they can't pay the bills. They can't buy planters, they can't buy parts, things get tight. The agronomic geometric theories are mine. One of the things I noticed about 20 years ago was we force soil, otherwise we push soil, okay? Field cultivator shovel pushes soil. A disc blade is a plow that just turns if it's a concave, okay? But we push soil. When you push soil, you compact soil. When you compact soil and you make a clod, the root cannot pull out moisture or nutrients. That soil may be dead for the year until it freezes, depends on the CEC. You know, in Clarinda, we've got some gumbo, 34 CEC. If the clod is this big in the fall, after freeze and thaw, it's still this big. That's where a lot of no-till and cover crops are coming in. The seed corn companies, the geneticists stepped up to the plate years ago. The chemical guys predominantly stepped up to the plate, but no one did anything as far as our equipment, very little. So what we want to do is we want to flow and lift soil, okay, instead of push soil and compact it. We want to maximize soil moisture and capillary action. Capillary action is major. And we also want to maintain the soil structure, because without moisture and capillary action, you're not going to get nutrient uptake. The crop is no different than your bodies. When you're thirsty, you need a drink. When you're hungry, you need something to eat. If you can't get a drink and you can't get something to eat, you're going to starve a little bit. So the only one we're going to worry about today is #1. And so our theories are to flow soil. And we do it basically by lodging the soil into the tooth in a forward motion and releasing it about the 430. The depth wheel will also really help do that. There is a video on prescriptiontillage.com. 4 years ago, we were running in Oklahoma in 34 CEC red soils. They were moist. We took a gauge wheel off to prove our point. I would like for you guys to go watch that video. You're going to notice there's something wrong at the scraper. And what was wrong at the scraper was there was no dirt coming up off the blade. No dirt coming up off the blade. We have guys in cotton running without a scraper. What's a scraper? A scraper causes friction. What does friction do? Slows the rotation of the blade. This blade turns differently than a standard blade. This is in that same field in Oklahoma. This is about 60, 70 bushel wheat. There was some capillary action in that ground, and it had been moist, so there was kind of a little wet snotty mat under there, and you can see the OEM blade didn't cut. All it did was plug. We didn't have the closing wheels down, but as you can see, we went ahead and created a trench, and if you could look at the bottom of it, we have granulated soil on it. Two things we want to do. We do not want to cause compaction, and we want to flow moist granulated soil back on top of the seed. If we can do that and get soil to seed contact, that plant will grow. It will develop primary and seminal roots. When it does that, if you don't get rain for 30 days, that's fine. It's going to survive. We also create a U. Most planters create a V. You can get seed lodging in a V. We create a U, and as you can see, we have granulated soil, on each side. We do that for multiple reasons. One, we want to prevent seed lodging. 2, we want to improve the soil to seed contact device. Flow rate just talked to you. It doesn't matter if it's Keaton, rebounder, flow rate. You want them down there doing their job. This is on my farm in Clarinda, Iowa. This 25 CEC soil. This is a compaction zone. This is actually a roadway. And as you can see, we still flow. We still can create some granulation, still put it right back in the furrow. We were asked a year ago, actually 2 years ago, to do some work with the Keaton finger. We did it. As you can see, the seed is at the bottom of the furrow, and it is lengthwise at the bottom of the furrow, and the Keaton finger is fully depressed in the bottom of the furrow. These were done by 24900 units, the side-by-side comparison that Kinsey allowed us to use. This is just a vertical shot, but the same thing. You can see the Keaton is fully depressed, so it can do its job. The OEM blade. Why does the OEM blade do that? Many reasons, many reasons. One is most OEM blades slide between 10 and 15% because they need massive sidewall contact to turn. These blades will shine up, they get slick. Moisture in the soil is a lubricant. It's like oil in your transmission. So especially the higher the CEC, the more the moisture, the more the lubricant, makes it harder for these to turn. That's part of the reason. The other part of the reason is a poor build hub assembly. We're going to get into that later. This furrow will cause seed lodging, and as the soil to seed contact device moves forward in forward motion, it hits the lodged seed, and as it's trying to depress it, it will move it. So there goes some of your spacing. So we just spent all this money on electric spacing, and now we're moving the seed with soil seed contact device, or the seed's not going all the way in the bottom of the trench. There's no reason to have a $250,000 or $500,000 planter if you can't get the seeds in the ground and get some root systems started. This is side-by-side comparison with the OEM, same field, like I say, side-by-side. The Keaton finger is not depressed in the bottom of the furrow, and the seed is lodged about, I don't know, 1/16 of an eighth of an inch above the very bottom of the furrow. That particular seed, predominantly, is going to become a sucker stock. So anytime you get uneven emergence, the guy in the middle is a weak dog, he's a weed. This is what we want. This was done about 2 years ago. By the way, the soil temperature was about 60 degrees, so it's not cold. Soil temperature was about 60 degrees. The STP blade, we granulated and flowed and lifted the soil, so we got good early primary and seminal root development. You can see this is a much healthier plant. The OEM is having trouble with root development, and it's basically a stunted plant. We did the weight checks on that in the fall, and this particular test was 20 bushels. Actually about 22, but let's call it 20. Here's what happened. We had sidewall compaction, and so yeah, the seed was down here, and so there was a void. A seed's just like a baby. You got to wrap it, and you got to wrap everything you can wrap to keep it warm and get it going. This void limited the soil to seed contact. It also limited capillary action and early primary root development. I've seen roots just follow the trench until they find a crack. Roots need a crack, a hole, or something to get into. Anytime you trowel the soil and make it smooth like concrete, they will not enter it until atmospheric pressure, sun up, sun down, cracks the soil, or you get rain to moisten the soil. This is the STP. This is also a vertical shot. You can see we granulated the soil. We do a lot of work with heavy soils. If you are successful in heavy soils, you will be successful in the rest of the soils. It's that simple. So if you want to grab the bull by the horn, you go to the bad dude, the heavy soils, and that's who you work with. Also, that same theory works really well for out in Nebraska where they have those really light soils, you know, and they have some issues with that. So the theories still work in that application. This is what we want to see, the lifting and fracturing of that soil. Look at the bottom of the seed trench. What's missing in the bottom of that seed furrow? Under normal true V's, there's a groove in here, okay? And why is there a groove? They're sliding, just like a trowel in concrete. There's no groove in the bottom of this furrow. So the primary roots can develop early and quickly. We have maintained capillary action, so we're going to get water in the seed and get it developed and get it to rolling. And we're predominantly going to have even seed emergence and early root development. This is imperative to getting a good crop. Sometimes you get a rain when you want it, Sometimes you don't. This is a side-by-side test. The OEM is on the left. You can see that we have smeared the sidewall. Remember the groove I was talking about? See it right there? That's one disc. And we have surface compaction. I'm going to tell you why that happens. And the STP blade has lifted the soil and fractured the soil. It also gives us soil to work with to granulate back in the furrow so we can get that early seed development. The other thing we eliminate is closing devices. So we're going to speak a little bit on that. I may step on some toes, guys. If I do, I'm sorry. I'm old school, black and white. Agronomics are number one, so I pretty much tell you the way I see it. Closing devices are detrimental in some parts of the country. They don't get enough rain. Depends on the closing device. Here's the way it works. When the true V's sin, it takes a lot to erase that sin, and sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. So it's hard to fix the sin. And what happens with a lot of the closing devices is they only go down about this deep. And if you look at Paul Schoffert's film, he'll even talk about that. They create clods and voids. And anytime you have a clod and a void, you're not going to get root development, and you're going to get poor emergence. The other thing they do is they also can be a compaction. Depends on the one that you have. Some of them wrap. We personally don't like closing devices, and we've tested a lot. There are about 3 of them that I think if you have to have them, they're probably top of the line. Paul's is one of them. But why buy them? They're $280 a row to start with, up to $1,100 a row. Why buy them? Why send to start with? It's an additional cost to the farmer, you know, and they don't work sometimes, guys. That's just the facts. You have to maintain that capillary action. The farmer that designed these planters years ago, the reason he designed these planters and had those closing wheels the way he did, he was doing full till at the time, and he knew he had to gently seal up the furrow to maintain and hold capillary action, because at night the water comes up. That's the way it was designed, and so he could get moisture on that seed and get it developed. Some closing devices cause a chimney effect. If you've got voids in the soil, diffusion up, diffusion down, it creates what we call a chimney effect. So you lose moisture. Last year, for the heck of it, we put these blades on and a rebounder, and we went out and we planted about 5 acres, and that's all we had. I wanted to prove a point. The point I wanted to prove is if you get good soil to seed contact and you can granulate soil back in the furrow, you're going to get emergence. And we did. And we got emergence very, very quickly. Don't do that. Don't do that. We did it for an experiment. If you get a heavy rain, you're going to have a problem. You're going to crush that whole area. But that's what we wanted to prove. We also had side-by-side factory closing blades with a rebounder on it, and it was a disaster. Why? They didn't flow moist granulated soil back on top of the seed, so there was no soil to seed contact. We're going to have those pictures up on the web. We haven't done it because I really don't want anybody to do it. This is what we want. You can see we had good primary and seminal roots. We've got good root proliferation. It's coming out in a vertical, uniform pattern. It's forming hairline roots. Okay, these plants are already healthy. You can see they have good leaf mass, good stalk mass. This is where we start the yield on a plant. We start the yields on plants early. You want to be top producer, you start them early. This was on Paul Schoffert's farm. I had to go out and get a stand, and while I was out there, his son Chris says, "Rich, I want you to look at my crop." They took a 3600 planter. They put on new OEM blades on one side and the STPs on the other side. I said, "What's wrong?" He says, "My brace roots are too small." I said, "They're supposed to be small." He says, "No, Rich, you don't understand. My brace roots are only this big." I said, "That's what they're supposed to be." And he says, "We've never had small brace roots." I said, "That's because you're getting compaction." And I said, "Why don't you go out there and try to pull that stalk out of the ground?" Well, Paul got excited, so we got a shovel, a spade, and we went to the field. This is what we dug up. These roots at 16 inches, we quit digging. Okay, those roots, there's a major mass 7 inches deep, which is what we want. They went down around 16 inches. I quit. We had hairline roots out about 15 inches, 20 inches OD of the stock. We kind of quit digging. Paul Schaffert has a video of this. All right, this is side by side, guys. What's wrong with that plant? Well, there's a lot wrong with that plant. One is your feeding system is only 3.5 inches deep. If you get a windstorm, you will get stock lodging. These roots could not penetrate the soil. So they created hairline roots to try to find a fine enough crack or an entry level to get in the soil. That plant is very inefficient. As a matter of fact, it was either going to tilt because of wind, or it couldn't get enough moisture nutrients uptake, so it started setting out another set of brace roots. Okay, very inefficient. All right. By the way, they are having the best year at Indianola, Nebraska they've had in years. If you're in a challenging part of the country or you have challenges, that's when these things really start to skyrocket. But even on a good year, and this is a good year, and these are 18C EC soils, and they have a lot of organic matter in them. A lot of organic matter. This is a vertical shot of the STP blade. You can see a nice root mass. You can see the brace roots haven't elongated any more than they had to get in the soil. This is the problem. There's 3 types of compaction these row units make, and we had all 3. But it was started by this guy right here, okay? Started with him. Here's what happens. When a true V blade slides, you cause subsoil compaction. You cause sidewall compaction. We have 2 effects. One is the true V blades depress the soil, which leaves a void like this to try to close. The other thing is, in certain soils, they just push it, which pushes soil underneath these depth wheels right here. And so your DP units are saying, hey, I got to have some DP to put on here, so they load her up, all right? And then we have surface compaction. One of the best developments I've seen in the last 20 years is the ability to regulate down pressure on the go. I'm big on it. So you have one action has caused 3 reactions, and here's what happens. Not only do we have 3 types of compaction, we have an open furrow issue. You know, you're just accessible to rodents, pore emergence. The other thing is we're setting this particular plant up for rootless corn syndrome. Rootless corn syndrome. I see it all over the country every year. Side-by-side comparison, you can see the STP blades. We have enough soil to predominantly close the trench. And you can see right here, we've got sidewall compaction. There is a groove down in here, and we're not going to close that trench with factory closing wheels. I'm big on factory closing wheels unless you're green cover planting and you can't flow enough moist granulated soil in to completely cover it, and then, you know, a closing apparatus is nice. We're not seeing much of that. We are changing these blades a little at a time to take care of that. We was really successful this year. This is 34 CEC soil. This is green, what we call green planting. As you can see, we closed, and that's on 1, and on 4, we still have an open furrow. When we have compaction in the soil, we can't get early root development. These particular 2 plants had a hard time developing a root system, and they are unleafing in the furrow. The reason they're doing that is nature says it wants to survive. They're trying to survive, and they're out of energy in the seed. These 2 plants predominantly will never yield anything. If they do, it'll be very little. Okay, they're already damaged. This particular plant is purple. He has a major phosphorus deficiency, and guess what's setting right here? See that white line? That's 1034 polyphosphate, put on with a Y knot. What happened there? Well, number 1, there was no moisture movement. If we'd have maintained capillary action, water up, water down, every 24, or every time the cloud goes over and looks like it's going to rain, the polyphosphate would have adhered to the moisture and became available to the plant in about 10-15 days, or depends on biology and soil temperature. But this plant has a poor root system, and it is starving for polyphosphate. And it's right here. It's right here. The guy spent 10-15 bucks an acre right there. All right, this is rootless corn. This happened in 2012 in a lot of areas in the Southwest. We had multiple freezes and thaws, so the ground was like powder, kind of like some of the Nebraska sands, like powder. Then we had some heavy rains. Guys had to plant. We went out and we planted. The corn couldn't develop adequate roots. This stalk's about 1.5 feet tall. The guys down around Mountain City and parts of Missouri, and the guys that had irrigation, they were putting on a lot of water to moisten and soften the soil enough so they could get roots in. That worked. But the guys without irrigation, they had to pray for rain. And that works, and sometimes it doesn't. All right, here's what happens. When blades get to sliding, remember what I said? You got to have massive sidewall contact to turn a blade. You can see that right here. Okay? So the soil gets to stick into the blade. Then the blade and the depth wheel, which should be partners, okay, now they're fighting each other. Because the soil sticking to the blade is flowing into the depth wheel, and the depth wheel is trying to scrape it off. It's also raising the depth wheel out of the ground, which causes uneven depth. Or you get to take your depth wheel off and unplug it. And when this happens, guys, unless it's a cast planter, you bend things. I don't care if it's the arm, I don't know if it's a pin, but you bend things because there's a lot of pressure there. And a guy in a tractor cab's looking this way, not back here, so he may drag it 50 foot, 100 foot, or 100 yards. I've done it myself, all right? This is what we want to eliminate. Remember the groove I kept talking about? Right there it is. All right, so if you guys go back and you start digging behind these planters, you'll see some of that stuff. All right, in 2015 on my farm, we were blessed enough to have a double hailstorm and 60-mile-an-hour winds. It came around, it hit us once, and it made a circle, and it hit us again. Okay? It was quite a day. What happened was we had poor root development on these 2 rows. If we didn't have 20-inch rows, we'd have never got that corn up. Matter of fact, a lot of my neighbors, the corn was so flat, the corn reels couldn't pick it up. They were out there raking them and turning cattle loose and everything else. But they had what we call rootless corn syndrome. That's what caused it. This is a side-by-side comparison. This picture is worth 1,000 words right here, guys. This was potentially 300 bushel corn. We have sprinklers. We're the only ones in Page County that has irrigation sprinklers. I was really thinking we were going to get 300 bushel corn out of this, but the hailstorm came when we were still doing a little pollination. I was thankful to get the 240 and getting 180 when it was laying flat like that was a major blessing. So you didn't have to look very far. You go up on the road and look very far, and a lot of crops were flat. And if you go out in the field, a lot of it was not snapped. A lot of it was poor root development. It was caused by subsoil, sidewall, and surface compaction. This is just a formula. It works for every crop. Your agronomically astute farmers will use it. The other ones won't. Basically, we did about 3 or 4 years of testing. I've got a very aggressive dealer that does a lot of weight tests for us, has for years. What we found was that we could cut our population from 36,000 back to 34,000 and raise the same or better crop. Same or better crop. The yield increase side by side was $56 an acre. And that was based off, I think, $3.50 corn when we were doing most of that. Well, now there's some $5 corn in that too. This is Paul Schoffert's farm. Dr. Klein, Robert Klein from University of Nebraska, and his assistant Catherine came out and did a lot of checks. The first check, Paul and I did, and Mike, and we gained 3,000 ears, full ears. In check 2, Dr. Klein and Catherine Coswell determined a kernel row increase of 2 rows per ear, increase in income around $32 per acre. I'm going to talk about my pet peeve, okay? My pet peeve is the no-till kohler. I don't like it. When I first started experimenting with no-till in 1980, I put a set on the planter. And by the second day, I knew I didn't like them because I was getting hairpinning and other stuff I didn't want. And by the 4th day, I took them off and sold them to another guy. This is interesting. I told the man when he came, I said, these things are junk. They cause all kinds of problems. But if you want them, I'll sell them. He said, well, I've been reading the magazine, and all we have to do is up our population, 3,000 or 4,000 in corn. Corn's 80 bucks. Bushel in, now it's 320 bucks. By the way, That's why you guys get to sell splitter planters, because the drills failed. And they failed just about everywhere. So when the splitters came out and we could get accurate depth and soil to seed contact, Kinsey took over the market, and it didn't take very long. That's why, because you could get soil to seed contact. And you didn't have to put down 250,000 seeds. You can raise the best soybean crop there is at 100,000 final stand. So one thing is, it does what we call blade roll. The soil sticks to the blade, rolls it out. When it does that, it creates a void. It may be a void this big and this long, maybe a void this long. In heavy soils, it'll leave a strip. The other thing it does, besides a void, and when you have a void, you have less dirt for the closing wheels to close. It's a major problem. The other thing it does, it flows moist granulated soil or moist clods into the depth wheel. Right there. Makes uneven depth, forces dirt between the disc blade and the depth wheel. They're not buddies anymore. They just started fighting, because now it's wedging stubble and dirt, and that's how you build bricks, basically, in between the depth wheel and the blade, and then you get your screwdriver out and your leather gloves. The other thing the no-till coulter does is it stubs back. We're going to talk about stubbing back. Stubbing back has been a major problem in the industry forever. You know, when I was a kid, we used to have disc sharpeners come around. Well, we lived with it for a while. Guys, you don't have to worry about it anymore, okay? That was a priority here. That was a priority. When that true V stubs back, it's like, instead of putting a 2-inch wedge in a tree to lay it over between two buildings, it's like putting a 6 or 8-inch wedge in a tree. It takes a lot more hammers. You may get it in, you may not. So you put in a 2-inch wedge, and maybe you'll put a 4-inch wedge in, then you'll put that 6 or 8-inch wedge in. It takes, on some of the studies, when we come back to a 4mm, 5mm bevel, it takes another 30 to 70 pounds a row, depending on soil, okay, depending on soil. It takes about another 30 to 70 pounds a row in DP to put that planter in the ground. And what does that cause? Well, it causes a reaction. More subsoil, more sidewall, more surface compaction. You know, it just keeps increasing. So I am not a proponent. We do make no-till coulters. You get them at your Kinsey, at the Kinsey store. It's a part number. We use them basically just to cut and save the hairpinning. And by the way, when a blade gets down around 5 millimeters in bevel, you're going to have a lot of hairpinning. The other reason we develop these blades is sometimes we have to rock around the clock, and when the capillary action comes up, these BT stubbles and soybean stubbles are like nylon twine to cut. So you shut down, because you need that stubble dry. The blade really doesn't cut the stubble. I should bring some stocks. I'm going to next year. The blade doesn't cut the stubble. It breaks it. These blades also push stubble, because they have no way to lock it in. Closing devices. Some closing devices, like I say, they're not all bad. Paul's got a pretty decent one. But a lot of guys with closing devices will extend the closing device away from your depth control and your seed placement. Our farm is basically flat and black, but we do have some slope. When you get into a 1% slope, most of these planters sag. I don't care if it's a 6-row or a 24-row, you get planter sag. And when you get planter sag, you need that closing device or closing wheel close, real close behind those depth wheels. Otherwise, one part of it is down in the furrow, and you're not doing anybody or anything any good. So that's something you may want to watch. The other thing is, $280 to $1,100 a row, and you didn't fix the problem. That's the problem. You spent the money, but you didn't fix it. All right, before we go on wear and some other stuff, here's how these blades work. We're going to do some videos, so you can go on prescriptiontillage.com, and we're going to break all this stuff down in segment, because you guys, as parts guys, are not going to remember this all day. One of the agronomic theories was we wanted to use concentrated force in forward motion. So we're going to have Christmas, and everybody's probably going to have some ham. So if you take a knife and you try to force that ham down, because that's what we're doing with an OEM blade right now. You're going to deform the ham. It takes a lot of DP to get it done. But if you take a knife with friction, you're going to cut a nice piece of ham. If it's a serrated knife, it's going to do a better job because you can load up pieces of the meat in between the tooth. Okay? So as this blade goes forward in forward motion, the soil lodges in between the tooth, dry soil on top, moist soil on the bottom, and then it causes a roller coaster effect right back into the furrow. We have videos of this. We put GoPro cameras where the seed tube is. You guys can see it in green cover, no-till. You should be able to slow it up, speed it up. That's why we designed it this way. We wanted to flow soil. The other thing is, by using concentrated friction and forward motion, we could start to cut stubble with the least amount of DP. We wanted to lessen the cutting. If you're out in parts of Nebraska or Idaho or parts of Georgia or in the South where they pick cotton on beds, sometimes those soils are so mellow, there's nothing solid to cut stubble with. There's nothing solid for the blade to push against to cut it. So you have to use friction, like this, and forward motion to cut that stock. The other thing is, when you're using friction and forward motion, as the tooth is coming down and it's starting to cut it pre-soil, you really start to save a lot of subsoil compaction in that zone. It actually does a little tillage in that zone. I call it flow. My head of sales calls it tillage. He wants to preach tillage to make everybody feel like they're tilling. Whatever, it's called flow. So the other thing we did was, one blade is a 15, the other blade is a 14 and 3/4. One tooth is longer than the other. In 100 linear feet, because these blades turn 92 to 95% of linear travel, you will have 11 complete tooth exchanges. But you can come up here and play with this, but as you turn it, you can see you have a continuance scissor or sharing action. It's by one being a little smaller than the other and one tooth being a little longer than the other. This works very well. The other thing we do, in order for a set of scissors to work, you got to keep the edge sharp. So we do a counter bevel on the inside of the blade. That gives us good contact at the soil contact point and stubble contact point, just like a set of scissors. The other thing the double bevel does is these two start to become partners because we have enough area that they have to start turning and working together. Two's better than one. Bring it into the depth wheel, 4 is better than 1. It's pretty simple. The other reason we do this, because we change this counter bevel just a little bit, is sometimes you can get, especially in green planting and cotton, man, I'm telling you, cotton roots and sugar cane, that's the real stuff. You could get that stuffed even if you cut it but it's loose, it can actually attach and come up into the blade and get in between the frog and the blade or the bearings, and it will lock them up. So when we did this, we lengthened the contact area to prevent that, okay? Because even though it may or may not be a problem up here, we don't know sometimes, it happened down there, so let's just fix it and call it good. So that's what we did. So the counter bevel is important. By the way, these are not a 15, they're 15.15. Okay, everything we do is over belt. The tips will start to wear off. Don't worry about it. The new blades being built now have just a little difference in them. Most guys will never know it. But this gives us the best cut and the best flow, but we're going to bring it up here just a little bit and bring her forward just a little bit so we can take away that aesthetic look. As you can see what this blade did right here, see? That real shiny tip, rounded a little bit. That's what the new designs will look like. Like I say, we just didn't have the machine power. As long as you have a bevel and a fillet, the blade's good. We want it, maintain, bevel it and fillet. This blade at 8 miles an hour, 450 pounds of DP, in 95 hours we lost 1/8 of an inch in diameter, but we maintained a 12 millimeter bevel and a 12 millimeter fillet. It was running from 18 to 34 CECs. Now, new, this particular blade was 14, had a 14 millimeter bevel, 14.5 fillet. And that's what we call the fillet, right? Right here. That's where we store the dirt. When this blade got down to 13.65, we still had a 13 millimeter tooth bevel and a 14 millimeter fillet. We do that by wearing the dirt, forcing the dirt into the fillet, because we want to erode the back part of the blade instead of the front part of the blade. That's basically how we do it. By the way, we got our patents on it, and 3 of my theories are patented, so I normally wouldn't say that, but we got 17 more claims last week. All right, same thing, 15, 13.5, 11. This blade is not wore out. It still has a fillet, and it still has a bevel. We had farmers calling last year wanting to know, their blade was still in spec, wanting to know what to do. I said, put new ones on the corn units and put these up front for the splitters. You'll be very happy, okay? This is an international blade. In our part of the country, they last 85 acres, and they are shot. And in 50 hours, or 121 acres, okay, not 230, in 121 acres, we had a 4.5, 5 millimeter bevel. That blade's junk, okay? It's causing more DP, it's causing more hairpinning, it's causing more compaction, and we lost the rivets. At 60 hours, we lost the bearing. That is nothing new to you parts guys, I'm pretty sure, okay? So, Ryan and I said we want to design a hub, and we had tried some aftermarket cast hubs. Be very careful with them. When you start to oscillate or you have to plant deep, they will hit the depth wheel. So if you're an international guy, you got about 3/4 of an inch on that RID tire, but they will cause havoc. We had farmers 2 years ago from Kansas planting stubble wheat. They couldn't go deep enough, and they were hitting some of the hubs. This hub is designed for about every planter on the market, including drills, okay? And you will not have to worry about your depth wheel hitting this hub, okay? It is a forged alloy steel hub. We designed this to last the life of the planter. When we test them at 14 mile an hour up to 20 mile an hour with 700 pounds of DP. We run the blade off the bearing, we take the race out, slap another one in, and we do that till we get close to out of tolerance. On the average, we don't get out of tolerance till about 10. The hub also helps transfer heat away from the bearing, and that's important. We'll talk about that. The hub also helps maintain true form at the bottom of the furrow. Remember the narrow furrow versus the U furrow? You got to have a rigid hub that has 94 to 95% of that outer race contact to maintain the furrow. You have to have it. These pressed hubs flex. The other thing about a pressed hub is, guess what, guys? Take one apart, send it to your shop. All your mechanics know what bluing is because they're setting up rear ends. Have them blue the bearing. You're going to find out you only have about 45 or 50% of outer race contact. Have them blue the bottom part of the hub. You're going to find out that you don't have very much contact on the hub because when they press the rivets, they flex the hub, and that's your contact, okay? That's your contact. That's a major problem. We have 94% hub to blade face contact. We have 95% outer race contact. This is a fully serviceable unit. You break a bolt, you put in a new bolt. It's a grade 8, 100-degree bolt. So we have 1.7 times the contact area of a rivet. So by doing all this, we can maintain true form in the bottom of the furrow. Let that get the furrow wide enough so that we can drop the seed in the ground. And guess what? Well, what else we do when we maintain true form? And if you're the farmer and the planter planting on a challenging year, you'll know this answer. You can stay in the cab. You don't have to get out with your screwdriver and your leather gloves because we can maintain contact between the true V, or the depth wheel, and the true V, and the true V is your cleaner. He's your friend. On these blades, he has a lot less work to do than on these blades. Some of the guys in cotton are taking the scrapers off. Some of the guys, I do not recommend this, but some guys right now experimenting with these all over are taking the scrapers off because they don't need them. When you lessen the friction, what do? you lessen the turning resistance, okay? You want these to turn. If I could get these to turn 100%, I would. If I could figure out a way to turn them 110, I will do that, because I can cut stubble so much faster. Speed, tooth is cut, and flow, all right? Here is a comparison. Single roller bearings load the balls in a opposing force during axial load applications. The double roller does not do that. It has two ball bearings like two pillars. It helps lessen that. This 204 bearing that we use is a deep groove bearing. It is a triple lip seal. We do not use dust caps on these. I told the manufacturer, I won't tell you what I told the manufacturer, but I did tell the manufacturer I wanted a really good seal and told him what I wanted. He was willing to give that to me, and I made him increase the tolerances on the seal. We went with a different grease, and it cost a little more money, but we replaced 11 bearings this year, or 15 bearings this year. This blade has a 1-season warranty. The whole assembly has a 1-season warranty. If a bearing goes out, call us, we'll send you one, and some bolts. This is one of the best pressed hubs I've ever seen, as far as a heavy hub. This is where the boss is. This is the support, and see where they put the rivet. The day they snap the rivet on that, they've already bent the hub. They've already bent the hub. The other thing about a hub is when they press it, it's a wedge. It's not a machine surface, it's a wedge. So guess what happens? When you put the bearing in, you wedge one side of the race tighter than the other side. Doesn't sound like much, right? Those races aren't very thick. So you automatically start tilting the balls. The other thing is, when you start doing that in a single roller bearing, and as the balls wear, it eggs the seal. When you egg the seal, two things happen. Grease goes out and dirt comes in. And then you've got a bad day. Our hub is bossed to support the center. We use a grade 8. We have 1.7 more times. These are fully serviceable. This hub is very rigid. We've tested this hub on 20-inch blades. We have multiple series of blades. For the guys in corn and soybean, you know, just stay with your STPs. If you are a Great Plains or international guy, you want to run with the S as a trail and the F as a lead. We do make a standard blade for guys that aren't prepared to go to a tooth. We make a standard blade with patent pending anti-stubbing. So we run a long bevel, and then we run a short bevel. The other thing is, these blades, when they come out, they're about 35 thousandths dull. So the friction and forward motion and the scissor action alleviates the need for these blades to be sharp. We have actually run these blades at 50 thousandths dullness and been very successful. So if they do want to run a standard blade, it is counter beveled on the inside. You can run 14 3/4 15, or you can run 2 15s and mate them. The anti-stubbing is promising. We don't have a lot of testing on it. We had 4 farmers run it this year. We're going to have a bunch of them run it next year. But typically we can't get guys to run these after they've run these. So it's kind of a challenge. Unless you're in canola, beets, you know, stuff, cotton, you're only going 1/4 of an inch deep. The STP is probably your best bet. The S is a trailing blade for crustbuster, Great Plains, C&H, STP-F. Does anyone have any questions? There's more to this, but I'm out of time. I'm probably over. I'm sorry. If you guys have any questions, there's no dumb questions. I'm telling you, I'm a farmer. You got any comments? I don't care. Just, you know.
So obviously there's got to be right-hand blades, left-hand blades.
There's a right-hand blade and a left-hand blade, and the way that's a good question. The way we set the planter up is one side of the planter, the 15s are out, you know, and the other side of the planter, the 15s are out, okay? So on a 12-row planter, you'll have, for example, 15 rights, then you'll have 15 lefts. Now, we've done some study. We've hinged the row units. We see very little difference, but I'm not going to take a chance on someone's livelihood.